My wife trusted me with one job, and that was her first mistake, because anytime someone says, "This is easy," my brain hears, "This will change your life forever." She looked at me with that calm confidence, like I was a capable adult. Like I had a resume or references, and she said, "All you have to do is drop this off." That's it. Not build a house, not defuse a bomb, just drop something off. And I nodded like, yeah, I've been training for this my whole life. Inside though, my brain was already asking questions nobody else seemed concerned about, like, where exactly is off? And how will I know when I've arrived there? What if I get there and it doesn't look like an off kind of place at all? I took the item like it was a newborn baby because suddenly it felt important, like this thing represented our entire marriage. If I lose this, we're not arguing, we're having a meeting. I'm walking to the car thinking, don't mess this up. Don't mess this up, which is the worst advice you can give someone like me, because now all I can think about is the many creative ways I could mess it up. I get in the car, sit there for a second, just staring at the steering wheel, because I realized nobody told me which way to go. And I don't want to text her, because if I text, she'll know I'm not ready for responsibility. I really want her to believe in me for at least 10 more minutes. So I start driving with confidence, which for me just means I'm moving, not necessarily in the right direction, but with purpose. Every red light feels like a test. People around me look like they know what they're doing. And I'm just hoping nobody asks me questions, because I have the energy of a guy who borrowed someone else's life for the afternoon. I keep replaying her words in my head, just drop it off. And I'm like, yeah, but emotionally this feels bigger. This feels like one of those moments where years later, people say, that's when we knew. Halfway there, I start wondering if I even brought the right thing. Look over at it like it might have changed on me. I'm thinking, what if I misunderstood? What if she meant a different one? Because we have multiple things at our house that look similar if you panic hard enough. Now I'm imagining her face when I come back with the wrong thing, and I don't even need her to say anything. I already hear it. That quiet voice that says, that's not it. Like she's talking to a child who tried his best and still somehow got the wrong animal on the farm. I finally pull into the place, and right away I know this is not my environment. Everyone here looks organized. They walk fast. Clipboards, no have clipboards. Nobody is wandering around wondering if they're allowed to be here. I sit in the car for a second, psyching myself up like I'm about to go on stage. I grab the item, take a deep breath, and step out, telling myself, off guy now, this is who you are. You drop things. That's your skill. And then immediately someone asks me, can I help you? Which feels aggressive, because now I have to explain myself out loud. I don't even fully understand it. Internally I say, yeah, I'm here to drop this off. And I hold it up like that clears everything up, like it has a name tag. They look at it, then at me. Do you have a form? A form? Of course there's a form. There's always a form. Nobody ever mentions the form. My wife didn't say anything about a form. She said it like I'd just gently place it on a magical shelf and leave as a hero. So now I'm standing there trying to decide if I should admit I don't have a form, if I should act like I know exactly what they're talking about and hope one appears. I tell them, I think my wife has it, which is a bold move, because my wife is not here. Now I've brought a mystery item with no paperwork, no story, and no credibility. They say, okay, we'll need that. And I nod like, yeah, that makes sense, even though inside I'm thinking, this is falling apart faster than expected. I walk back to my car, not defeated, just confused, like the universe added a bonus level I wasn't trained for. I sit there, phone in hand, staring at her name, knowing that the moment I call, the dream of being a reliable man is over. When she answers, I try to sound calm, like this is all part of the plan. I say, so quick question, which is never quick, and she immediately goes, what happened? Because somehow they always know. I explain the form situation, and there's this pause, like she's deciding how honest she wants to be with me today. Then she says, I put it in the envelope with the thing. And now I'm looking at the thing, thinking I did not see an envelope, but also I did not look very hard because I assumed life would be simple for once. So I start searching through it right there in the car, like I'm diffusing something, papers flying, checking pockets that don't make sense. And of course, the envelope is there. In the most obvious place, the place you'd check first if you were someone who believed in themselves. I walk back inside trying to regain dignity, holding the form like, see, I'm a professional. I just wanted to take the scenic route emotionally. I hand it to them. Now there's more questions, because once people realize you're not confident, they keep going. They're asking for details. I don't have dates, numbers, things my wife definitely knows, but I absolutely did not think to ask, because in my mind this job was pick up, walk in, drop off, leave forever. So now I'm guessing, which feels dangerous. They're smart, because every answer I give becomes part of a permanent record somewhere. I'm like, yeah, that sounds right. Sure, let's go with that, hoping nobody audits my life later. Eventually they take it and they say, you're all set. And I feel this wave of pride, like I just completed a mission in a movie. I walk back to the car taller than before, thinking I did it. I'm the guy now, she can trust me. I get in, start driving home, already planning how casual I'll be when I tell her. Like, yeah, no big deal, just handled it. But then, about 2 minutes into the drive, I realize I might have left something important behind, maybe taken something I wasn't supposed to, misunderstood one final tiny detail that's about to come back and introduce itself, because that's usually how these stories go, right? When you think you're safe, your phone buzzes, and your stomach just knows before your brain does, and you look down at the screen and see her name again. Before you even answer, you're already thinking, okay, what did I miss this time? My wife trusted me with one job. The moment she said it, I knew this was bigger than it sounded, because anytime someone adds the word just before a task, it's never just anything. She said, just take this and drop it off. Like she was handing me a cup of coffee, not the emotional stability of our relationship. And I nodded like, yeah, of course, I'm the guy for this, because confidence is easy when nobody has asked follow-up questions yet. Inside though, I felt that familiar pressure, the kind that says, this is a test, not of skill, but of whether you can be trusted to exist in public without supervision. Took the item from her carefully, like it might explode if I moved too fast, and I realized she was watching me in that quiet way, not suspicious, just hopeful. That's worse. Suspicion you can fight. Hope means expectations. Expectations are where I usually get into trouble. She smiled and said, it's easy. And I smiled back like we were two adults who had done easy things before. My brain immediately started listing evidence that I am not, in fact, known for completing easy tasks without turning them into stories people tell later. As I walked toward the door, I could already feel myself standing a little straighter, because in that moment I wasn't just a husband. I was a responsible husband, a man with a mission. You don't see that version of me very often, so I want to enjoy it while it lasted. I told myself, don't overthink this, which is funny, because I have never once followed that advice. Overthinking is my warm-up. It's how I prepare for even the smallest responsibilities. Like, I'm about to give a TED talk on carrying things. By the time I reached the car, the task had grown in my mind. This wasn't just a drop off anymore. This was proof. Proof that I could be trusted with something that didn't beep, ring, or remind me every 5 minutes. I sat in the driver's seat for a second, holding the item in my lap, staring at it like we were in this together now. I hadn't even started the engine, and already I was thinking, okay, first rule, don't lose this. Second rule, don't forget why you have it. Third rule, try to remember where you're going, even though nobody actually said it out loud in a way that felt official. I kept replaying her words, just drop it off, like there was some secret adult code hidden in there that I was supposed to understand. Drop it off where? To who? At what point do I know I've succeeded? There's no trophy for this, no finish line. You just come back home and say, it's done, and people believe you. That feels like too much trust for a system with no paperwork. I started the car and immediately felt like I was on a game show where the prize is not disappointing your spouse. The rules are simple, but nobody explains them. I imagined her telling her friends later. I sent him to do one thing. He handled it. And that image alone was enough to keep me driving straight, because I wanted to be that guy, even if just for the afternoon. But even as I pulled out of the driveway, there was this quiet voice in my head saying, don't get comfortable. You always get comfortable right before something goes wrong. And I knew it was right, because I could already feel myself planning how casual I'd be when I got back. Like, yeah, no big deal. Just out there being dependable. That's usually when life leans in and says, oh, so this is the story you're telling today. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, thinking, okay, let's see how far this confidence can take me. Once I was on the road, that's when my brain really got involved, because up until then, everything had been physical, just holding something and walking. But now there was space for thoughts, and my thoughts don't travel light. I had miles of quiet and nothing to do but start questioning a task that, on paper, required no questions at all. Just drop it off, she said, but my mind heard, interpret this correctly or face emotional consequences, and suddenly every detail felt important, even the ones nobody mentioned. I started wondering if I was even going the right way, even though I'd driven this road 100 times before, because when responsibility is involved, familiar roads feel different. They expect more from you. I kept checking the mirrors, not for cars, but like the task might sneak away if I wasn't watching it. The item sat on the passenger seat. I glanced at it every few seconds just to make sure it was still there, still being itself, because I didn't trust it not to change into something else the moment I looked away. Then the questions started piling up. What if there's more than one place to drop it off? What if I walk into the wrong building and they look at me like I've brought them something they've never seen before? What if I'm supposed to say a name when I get there and I don't know the name? So now I'm just the guy who shows up with an object and no explanation, which feels like the beginning of a police report. I tried to calm myself down by saying, this is simple. People do this every day. But that didn't help, because people also walk into glass doors every day, and I could easily be one of those people if I let my guard down. Imagined all the tiny ways this could go wrong, not in dramatic explosions, just in awkward pauses and quiet disappointment. The kind that lingers longer than yelling. That's the stuff that stays with you. At one red light, actually picked the item up and checked it like I was making sure it was still the right one. Even though I had no idea how to tell, I just stared at it, hoping it would somehow communicate, like, don't worry, you're doing great. But it didn't say anything which felt concerning. I thought about calling my wife to confirm details, but then I imagined her saying, you're already on your way, right? And me having to admit that I was, but emotionally, I was still in the driveway. So instead, I kept driving, narrating the mission in my head like I was my own GPS. Next step, arrive. After that, we'll figure it out. That's usually my plan. Get to the place first, panic in a new location. There's something hopeful about thinking your confusion might clear up once the scenery changes. The closer I got, the more the task grew in importance. This wasn't just about dropping something off anymore. This was about proving I could be trusted with instructions that didn't come with bullet points. I started thinking about how I'd explain this later if it went wrong, already preparing my defense, which is not a great sign when you haven't even reached the building yet. There was this moment where I realized I couldn't remember exactly how she'd said it. Not the words, but the tone. Was it casual? Was it careful? Did she hesitate before handing it to me? Because now my brain was rewriting the memory, adding weight to it, turning a normal exchange into something that felt like a scene from a movie where the music changes right before everything goes wrong. I pulled into the area and slowed down, scanning for signs, numbers, anything that looked official, and my heart was beating faster for no reason other than my own imagination. I told myself, you are overthinking. Even that felt like another thing to overthink. And as I turned the wheel and rolled forward, I had this strong feeling that whatever happened next, it was going to be one of those moments where later I'd say, this is where it all started, right when I thought the hardest part was just getting here. I stepped out of the car and immediately knew this place was not built for people like me, because everyone else looked like they had arrived with purpose. They walked fast, held folders, talked into headsets. Not one of them paused to wonder if they were allowed to be there. I, on the other hand, stood by my door for a second too long, adjusting nothing, just trying to absorb the energy of capable adults, hoping some of it would transfer if I stayed still. I picked up the item and carried it close, not because it was heavy, because I felt like holding it tighter might make me look more official, like, see, I'm clearly here for a reason. As I walked toward the entrance, the doors opened automatically, which startled me more than it should have. And they're smart, because I wasn't emotionally prepared for technology to recognize my presence. It felt like the building had made a decision about me before I'd made one about myself. Inside, everything was brighter than expected. Clean floors, signs with arrows, people who knew exactly which direction those arrows meant. I stopped just past the doorway and pretended to look at my phone, not because I had a message, because standing still while staring at a screen is the universal signal for I belong here. I'm just waiting on information you don't need to know about. That's when I realized I didn't know where to go. There was no big sign that said, drop offs for confused husbands this way. So I did what any confident person would do. Picked a direction and committed to it. not slowly, because slow looks unsure. I walked at a pace that said, I've done this before, even though every step felt like I was sneaking into somewhere I wasn't invited. As I passed people, nodded at them, not as a greeting, but as a mutual acknowledgement that we were both adults handling adult things. None of them nodded back, which made sense because they were actually busy. I was just playing busy. There's a difference. Deep down, everyone can feel it. Then someone said, "Can I help you?" And I froze for half a second because I wasn't ready to be seen. It felt like getting called on in class when you haven't even found the right page yet. I turned and saw a very calm, very professional person looking directly at me, and now I had to explain my existence. I said, "I'm here to drop this off," and held the item up like it had a badge. It could introduce itself better than I could. They looked at it, then at me, and asked, "Do you have an appointment?" Which is a question I have never liked because the answer is usually no, even when I think it's yes. I said, "I don't think so," in a tone that suggested I might be wrong. I was hoping confidence would fill in the gaps. They nodded slowly. The way people do when they're deciding how complicated your day is about to become. They pointed down the hall and said, "You can check at the desk over there." And I thanked them like they just saved my life. Because now I had a direction. Direction is everything when you're lost. I walked down the hall, replaying the interaction in my head. If I'd sounded normal, or if I'd just introduced myself as a man with an object and no plan. At the desk, it was a line which was both good and bad. Good because it meant I wasn't alone. Bad because it meant more time to stand there, thinking about what I was going to say when it was my turn. I watched the people ahead of me speak clearly, using words that sounded official, and I tried to memorize their tone, like maybe I could borrow it. When I finally stepped forward, the person behind the desk smiled and said, "How can I help you?" And suddenly, I was back at the beginning again because I realized I still didn't know. I took a breath, held the item up once more, and said, "I'm supposed to drop this off," hoping that somewhere in the building, there was a system designed to catch people like me before they fell all the way through. Standing at that desk, with a line forming quietly behind me, and a professional smile waiting in front of me, I realized I had reached the edge of my knowledge. This was as far as confidence could carry me. Beyond this point, there were going to be questions, and answers require information, which I did not bring with me. The person behind the desk asked what I was dropping off, and I described it the way someone describes a lost pet, focusing on what it looked like, not what it actually was, because that felt safer. They nodded and then asked for a name. Not my name, which I was ready for, but the name of the person it was for. That's when my brain did that quiet panic thing where everything goes silent except the word name. I stared at them for half a second too long enough for both of us to know I didn't have one. I said, "It's for my wife," which is not helpful in a building full of strangers, but it was the most honest answer I had. They smiled politely, the kind of smile that says they've heard worse, and asked for any paperwork. Paperwork is dangerous because paperwork implies planning. I told them, "I think she has that part," and immediately knew how that sounded, like I was part of a team, but only responsible for carrying the thing, which, to be fair, was accurate. They asked if I could call her, and I said yes, like that had been my idea all along. I stepped to the side, pulled out my phone, suddenly felt very small, like a kid calling home from school because he forgot his lunch. When she answered, I tried to sound calm, like everything was going exactly as expected. I said, "Hey, quick question." And she said, "What happened?" Because somehow she always knows. I explained that they were asking for details, and there was this pause. Not long, just long enough for me to picture her closing her eyes. She started listing things I should say, names, numbers, instructions, and I tried to repeat them back like I was copying homework from the smart kid, hoping I didn't miss anything important. I nodded even though she couldn't see me, because nodding helps me remember. The whole time, I could feel the people around me moving, living their organized lives, while I stood there being coached through a task I thought was already almost done. When I hung up, I walked back to the desk with a new sense of purpose, not because I suddenly understood everything, but because now I had a script, gave them the name, the details, everything she'd just told me, trying to keep my voice steady, like this information had been in my head the whole time. They typed it into their computer, eyes moving across the screen, and I watched their face for any sign that I'd said something wrong. Then they asked another question. Of course they did. It was a reasonable question, but it wasn't on my list. And now I had to decide whether to guess or admit I didn't know. I paused just a beat too long and said, "Let me double check," which is adult code for "I have no idea." I pulled my phone out again, but before I could call, I thought, I can handle this. I'm here. I should try. So I gave my best answer. It wasn't a lie. Exactly. It was more like an optimistic version of the truth. They nodded some more and said, "Okay," in a tone that could mean anything. Now I was standing there wondering if I'd just successfully completed my mission or if I'd accidentally agreed to something that would follow me home later. They finally said, "We'll take it from here," and reached for the item. I hesitated for a split second before letting go, not because I didn't want to give it to them, but because once I did, I couldn't fix anything anymore. Would be out of my hands, literally and emotionally. I handed it over, watched them place it behind the desk, and felt this strange mix of relief and worry, like when you send an email and realize you can't edit it anymore. They smiled and said, "You're all set." And I smiled back, thanked them, and turned to walk away, thinking this might actually be over, while another part of me was already bracing for the moment I'd hear my name called again. Because I've learned that when something feels handled too easily, it usually means it's just getting started. I walked out of that building like a man who had just been promoted, even though nobody told me I was promoted, and I still didn't know what my job was. But in my mind, I had done it. I had entered a serious place, spoken to serious people, handed over the serious item, and somehow escaped without alarms going off. That felt like success. The doors opened for me again, less surprising this time. I stepped into the parking lot with my shoulders a little higher, like the sun itself should be proud of me. As I reached my car, I did that thing where you pause for a second before getting in just to enjoy the moment. You don't want to rush past a victory, even a small one, especially when most of your victories are things like finding matching socks. I set my hands on the roof, looked around, and thought, yeah, that's right, I handle things. Somewhere in my head, I could already hear myself telling my wife later, casual voice, no big deal. Yeah, it's done. Like I hadn't rehearsed that sentence the entire drive. I got in, closed the door, and just sat there for a second. The relief settled in. That's when the doubts tried to sneak back, because they always do. Did I say everything right? Did I give them the correct name? Was that okay? They said a good okay or a we'll see kind of okay. But I pushed those thoughts away because this was my moment, and I wasn't going to ruin it by replaying the tape like a coach who can't stop watching game footage. I started the engine and pulled out, feeling lighter now that the passenger seat was empty. It's amazing how much emotional weight an object can have when it's your responsibility, and how fast that weight disappears when it's not. The road home felt smoother, like the universe was saying, "See, you did it. We'll let you enjoy this part." At a red light, I caught my reflection in the mirror and smiled at myself, not in a weird way, just a respectful nod like, "Good job today." I imagined my wife's face when I'd tell her it was done. That little look of approval that doesn't come with fireworks, but still feels like winning something. Even thought about adding a detail or two to the story, not to lie, just to make it sound cleaner, more confident, like, yeah. Took it right away, super easy in and out. As I drove, I started planning the rest of my day like a man who had earned his freedom. Maybe I'd stop for coffee. I'd take the long way home. I had options now. That's what success gives you, options. I was already 10 minutes into my victory lap when my phone buzzed in the cup holder. I glanced down and saw her name on the screen. My stomach did that little drop it only does when something important is about to be said. For a second, I told myself, this is it. She's calling to say thank you, to say she knew she could trust me. I answered with my best calm voice, the one that says everything is under control. "Hey," I said. I hadn't just been thinking about her approving me in my head. She said, "So you dropped it off?" And I said, "Yeah." Done with just the right amount of confidence. Not too proud, just solid, reliable. There was a pause, not long, but long enough for my brain to start working again. Then she said, "Did they ask you about the other thing?" The other thing. That phrase hit me like a mystery clue in a movie I hadn't been paying attention to. I stared at the road, trying to picture the entire interaction again, searching for any moment where an other thing might have come up. I said, "What other thing?" Which is never the right answer. She explained casually like it was obvious, and as she talked, could feel that confident version of myself slowly packing his bags. Because with every word, became clearer that there was a part of this mission I had not even known existed, and now I was already halfway home, replaying my victory in my head, while somewhere back there, in that very professional building, there might be a person looking at my drop off and wondering why something important was missing. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, thinking, okay, this story might not be over yet. I kept driving, but now the road felt different, like it had opinions. Every car around me suddenly seemed faster, like they all knew something I didn't. My wife was still talking, explaining what the other thing was, and I was listening, but also not listening because my brain had already started replaying the scene at the desk in slow motion, searching for the exact second where I should have realized there was more to this job. I nodded even though she couldn't see me, saying, "Okay, yeah, that makes sense," which is what you say when nothing makes sense at all. Told her I didn't think they mentioned it, and she went quiet for a moment, not angry, just calculating, like she was doing math in her head with numbers I didn't have. Then she said, "It was in the envelope with the form." And that's when my heart sank, because I remembered the envelope. I remembered seeing it. I remembered thinking, that looks important, and then somehow deciding it would probably take care of itself. I pulled into a parking lot so I could think, because my mind doesn't do well at highway speeds. I told her, gave them the form, and she said, and the other paper, and I said, I don't think so. And there was another pause, heavier this time. The kind of pause where you can hear someone choosing their words carefully. She didn't yell. That would have been easier. Instead, she just said, that's the main one. We sat in silence for a second, connected by the phone, both of us picturing the same thing, that desk, that computer, that professional person who now had part of what they needed and no idea the rest was still sitting in my car, folded neatly like it was waiting for me to remember its importance. I looked over at the passenger seat, which had been empty, realized I'd placed the leftover papers in the door pocket without thinking, like they were grocery receipts. I told her I could turn around. I said it quickly, like if I offered fast enough, it might cancel out the mistake. She said, yeah, you probably should. And I could hear that she was trying to stay calm, which somehow made it feel more serious. I made a U-turn. Now every mile back felt longer than the miles before, because now I knew exactly what I was carrying and why it mattered. As I drove, my phone buzzed again with a message from her, adding one more detail I needed to tell them, just in case. Read it at a red light, repeating it in my head like a password. I didn't want to mess it up twice. That felt greedy. When I pulled back into the parking lot, my earlier confidence was completely gone. I parked in a different spot, not on purpose, just because nothing felt the same anymore. I grabbed the papers, checked them 3 times to make sure they were real, walked back toward the building, hoping nobody would recognize me as the guy who already handled it. Inside, everything looked exactly the same, which was almost insulting. The same clean floors, the same signs, the same fast walkers. The building hadn't even noticed my personal crisis. I headed back to the desk, rehearsing my explanation. I wasn't going to blame anyone. I was just going to say, hey, turns out I also have this. Like this was a fun bonus, not the missing piece of the entire process. When I got there, it was a different person behind the desk. Of course it was. That's how life works. The one person who might have remembered me was gone. And they're smart, and now I had to start over with someone who had no idea I'd already lived a full emotional journey in this building today. I said, hi, I was just here, which means nothing to someone who wasn't. They looked at me politely, and I held up the papers saying, I think you might need these too. Trying to sound helpful, like I was doing them a favor. They took them, started looking through the computer, and asked for my name. I gave it, then immediately wondered if I should also give my wife's, just to cover all angles. They typed for a long moment, longer than I liked, and I stood there watching their screen like I could read it through their eyes. Finally, they said, okay, and my shoulders dropped just a little, because that sounded promising. But then they added, it looks like there's one more thing missing. And I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, that feeling that says, you are not done yet, not even close, because somehow this simple job has turned into a story that keeps finding new ways to continue. And I leaned in slightly, already knowing that whatever they were about to say next was going to keep me right here a little longer. So I finally got home, carrying what I thought was everything, ready to tell her, mission accomplished, and she looked at me with that look, the one that says, I trusted you, but now I'm curious how you managed to make it more complicated than it needed to be. And that's when I realized the truth. No matter what I do, no matter how many forms I carry, how carefully I drive, or how confident I act, trusting me with a single simple task is basically a gamble, like rolling dice with a toddler, except the toddler occasionally texts you instructions from another room. And honestly, that's marriage in a nutshell. You think it's easy, you think you've got it, and then she gives you one job, and somehow, magically, you make it a story you'll never forget, and neither will she.